Namaste. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our continuing series, Evenings with Sraddhalu. I invite and I welcome Sraddhalu. Namaste.
Namaste, and happy to be with all of you.
We are happy to continue our session. In the last few sessions, we covered the interesting topic, the secrets of occult science. And today we will take some questions on this topic and on other worlds and beings. During the conversations, if you have any questions related with our topic of today, please address in the chat box on YouTube. I will start addressing first two questions which we received from Nina. I was puzzled by the following phenomenon. One chiropractor in California does some occult practices, instead regular chiropractor adjustment. He called it neurospinal analysis. Bunch of clients face down on the massage table. He goes to each one and holds his hand above the back of the client without touching, and the body of the client begins to shake, tremble, vibrate. He tried the same thing with me, but nothing happened. I asked him the reason. He said, "Your gates are not open." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Oh, you have too much of chi, prana, no?" Looked like trying to avoid my question, this chiropractor. He was certainly doing some occult practices, I believe. But what was it? Hypnosis? Using some vital being or vital word? Or what else? And another question which is related, and I hope Sraddhalu will be able to link the answer. Nina is writing, another experience was just opposite. I was working on a client who was certainly possessed by some being. She was habitually going to nightclubs, drinks, and felt powerful. That's what she said. First, I had refused to work on her, but a friend insisted, so did work on her while constantly repeating the mantra, "In the name of the mother, for the sake of the mother. I order all the hostile forces to leave this place at once and forever." After an hour, she was totally cured. Her face looked like a totally new person. I took a photo of her face and showed to her. I had taken a previous picture before the treatment. But strangely, I was sick soon after, terribly sick. High fever, and usually I'm never sick. My nose was swollen like a big red potato, like a blow. It was a strep infection that took me 2 weeks to recover. And there was sign of injury on the nose. I had to have a surgery. Why I was not protected by the mother? What was wrong with me? And after a couple of days, the girl was exactly the same like before, sick and possessed. So I could not really help her, and yet I got the blow. Anyway, I learned not to deal with any possessed person or negative people. So it's a very extensive letter we received from Nina, and I invite Sraddhalu to open our session.
Yes, it's a very interesting description. And I'm glad that Nina shared this with us, because both experiences that she has described are open to a very deep exploration. We can draw a lot of interesting insights, useful knowledge from both of these, even though the experiences are not very comfortable. And briefly, I had a hesitation whether to put the full text in detail, because sometimes even just hearing about such things and reading about them is slightly disconcerting. But on the other hand, it is good to know. It is good to understand, and it is good to not make mistakes because you understand. I've seen so many cases where people, not having a background of what's really happening, slipped into all kinds of dangerous situations. So in the first case, Nina has described two experiences. In the first case, it's about a chiropractor who has his patients lie down, face down on several tables, and then he goes from person to person, places his hands above their back without touching. And obviously, there's some energy being pumped into the spinal cord. The position itself should tell you that the person is working on the chakras. The spinal cord being exposed, that's the part where the entry is made by what he's doing. The result of what he does is that the client begins to shake, tremble, and so on. And when he tried to do it on Nina, it had no effect. And his first response on being asked was, your gates are not open. What he meant by gates was your chakras. He could not access, he could not reach, he could not do the thing which he was doing to the others. So it was as if closed to him, to his access. And then later he made some comment, you have too much chi, too much energy. Rather, his energy being pushed down was not entering because she had something which was more powerful than his, which he interpreted as too much energy. It was not that. It was a protective energy which was there, which was more powerful than his intrusive energy. And the result was that she was not affected. So it was not hypnosis. It was definitely using some beings of the vital world, because just merely human being transmitting life force would not have this kind of effect. So I'll just explain this a little more in detail. Our chakras are natural entry points or link points between the physical body and the subtle body. These are the points where there is a special opening, as if linking the two, and each of these centers representing different gradations of consciousness at which the links take place. In reality, the entirety of the consciousness of the subtle is linked to the entirety of the physical in a one-to-one correspondence, literally mapping upon it. But there are focal points of organization. Just as we may say, although the awareness, mental quality, substance, chitta, as we have called it, is extended all over the body, you can be aware of any part of the body. The physical nervous system is the means by which that awareness plugs into the most dense layer of the physical body. And the primary focal point for that plugging in is through this thing which we call the brain. But you could knock out the brain, you could have the brain itself deficient, you could even put the brain in a state of numbness, and the consciousness could directly relate still to the hands, arms, or other parts of the body, and still act, receive impulses, and so on. But the brain is the primary focal point. Thus, we have several primary focal points which are called the chakras. Chakras because when seen in the subtle sight, they appear like whirling, spinning, roundish shaped, wheel-like, and so on. Chakra meaning wheel. And sometimes even they describe them as spokes. They're not really spokes, they're rather aspects, petal-like aspects or powers, sometimes described with colors, sounds, vibrational qualities. Now, when the patients were made to lie down with their back exposed, the chiropractor coming, placing his hand, there was a transmission of energy. But with the explicit intent of forcing its way through the chakra, while the chakra normally links the physical body with the subtle body, because it's a linking point, somebody from outside can hack into the link and insert their energy. And inserting the energy, they can separate this link between subtle and physical, and so seize the physical control, which would be the basis for phenomena like automatic writing, where I am seeing my hand as if disembodied, my consciousness is somehow not able to control, and the hand moves of its own, controlled by this intrusion, the hack of the subtle being, let's say. Or using the chakra as entry point, they can seize control of parts in the subtle body. So, for example, intrude into the emotions, provoke emotions, insert certain patterns of emotions, habitual patterns, which may be a part of their control or their consciousness entering, or take over the mind control And in which case, it is the most difficult to get free of it, because the mind sees the person is convinced it is him when it's not. And so it's very difficult to separate them. In most cases, though, because this intrusion takes place, the subtle body itself coming under control eventually, the psychic being which is supporting these layers of personality, the psychic being which is behind it all supporting, finds itself disconnected from the personality by this intrusion which has come in between, the hack of the connection. Over time, the vital being would increase its influence into these parts, eventually taking over, and that's when a complete takeover would be called a possession. So I'm going into this detail because we will, in a sense, understand both phenomena, the two experiences that Nina has described. When this complete takeover takes place, the psychic being itself inside finds itself unable to intervene, unable to act, completely lost. It may choose at that point to just stay on and watch the hijack of its machinery, of its personality, and just stay and draw what it can from its experience, or it may choose to withdraw if it finds itself suffocating too much. In such a case, the possession being complete, it's no more that person. What is interesting in these phenomena is that when the vital being increases its influence and takes over, first there is a slight warping in the personality. And generally, it's in the vital nature. Anger, violent emotions tend to become more prominent. The psychic influence which refined the emotions becomes weaker and weaker. The coarseness, crudeness, forcefulness of the vital being. It can be a very developed vital being, but if it does not have a psychic being, then the aspects which relate to the deeper sense of refinement and sensitivity specific to the psychic being, the aspiration, the love, the sense of an underlying oneness, the participation of the delight in the manifestation, all those fade out. And often in the case of very strong asuric beings, it can be highly developed intellect, but emotionally it would be almost blank, or it would be emotions as a machine under charge of its intellect. Less developed beings would have no intellectual content. It will be just physical, manipulative, emotional, vital energies. Now, the entry point being the chakras is what we see in the first example that Nina narrates. The person puts his hand, he himself does not have the capacity to intervene. He did not even know. He could just feel that there was some pushback, some protection stronger than his. But the being operating through him is a vital being. And it puts its energy trying to get hooks into these patients. It could do two of things. One is either gain control of some kind to influence them, build a kind of a following through that influence. What may happen to those patients who get strongly influenced is afterwards, they will feel like coming and again to this person. They will feel like giving up their freedom, handing over their life more and more to his influence, which is how you see many of these little small kinds of movements around charismatic figures take place. And you will see people who have relatively undeveloped inner sensitivity are the ones who tend to get sucked in very easily into such movements, because the warning influence of the psychic does not come, or the outer personality is very strongly formed, not unified with the psychic, and it can be very intelligent, it can be very individualized. That's not a criteria. It can be weakly individualized, then it's a different kind of attraction. But even a strongly individualized, lacking the psychic discrimination, could get hooked in with the full force of its independent individuality. You'll say, I am choosing, this is what I am looking for, and get fooled completely. All this is to warn you that the only protection by which you will know and distinguish when there is a mixture is that deeper psychic influence. And so we will come to that later, perhaps again towards the end of our discussion today. To come back to the influence, when this person puts, or when this vital being puts its influence, those people will tend to come under the suggestion and a kind of a hypnotic influence of this chiropractor, may want to come back to him, or if his goal was to present himself as some kind of a leader or teacher, he would form a group around him, gain money, fame, etc., which is what the vital being is looking for or gives to his instrument, human instrument. Since the action was through an entry, getting a partial grip was the original intention. There could be a second intention some of these vital beings have, is to draw energy from you, to feed on your vitality, to increase their own power. So in certain movements that I have had personal contact with because of the nature of some interaction in public work, I saw that the entire movement was as if held by some kind of a being behind. It could be benevolent, but still it was feeding on the energies. So in one of those movements, they required the disciples to focus on the human instrument and concentrate on the human instrument. So it was a one point to multiple, and from everybody, it was as if drawing energy, feeding on it. There are many secondary religious sub-religions, subgroups, cults, which are based on this kind of influence. To the extent that there's a grip energetically, you could call it a form of hypnosis, but otherwise, primarily, it's a vital influence. So in Nina's case, because of the protection of the spiritual influence and the protection of the Divine Mother, to whom she was open enough and her life oriented to the Divine Mother, there was the natural protection on these gates of the chakras. The man trying to, or rather the being trying to enter, found it blocked. So the man's first comment was, gates are not open. No, gates were open, but they were not open to him, to his vital influence. They were open to a higher influence and refusing a lesser. And later he felt it as too much energy, as if it was pushing back. The protection was pushing back, refusing. I've heard of similar stories from others also, in whom the dedication and one-pointedness was very clear. I've personally had similar experiences, which I've narrated in some earlier discussions with Narad, where I was taken by a friend to somebody who basically is a mind reader with some vital being reading. And it's those beings who sit in the ear and whisper. So you go in front of him and then he just starts telling you your life. Most people think, oh, this is a great spiritual attainment, and then they start asking questions, at which point the being gives them deceptive information and creates chaos or confusion. I was not interested because of my friend's insistence. I said, okay, let me see what happens. I went there. The man spoke for about 10 or 15 minutes, like a tape recorder, blah, 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 blah. And he started with, you were in your teenage, you applied to join in the army, and then you did this, a whole series, a whole story. Not one statement was true. It was precisely wrong all the way through, 100%. My friend, who knew enough of my background, came out shocked. He said, everybody that I've brought here has been given precise descriptions of their life, and here it was 100% off. So I just laughed because I knew that it was the natural protection. Even in going to that person, I was conscious of the mother's protection around me, and it was there naturally. And this is very important for all of us. It's not that all of us get exposed to such things. These exposures are rare. But wherever you find yourself exposed, be conscious, be clear that your aspiration, and I'm going to use an odd word here in context of aspiration, your ambition, your desire, your dream, your aspiration should be aligned. If you have an ambition that is contrary to your spiritual aspiration, a personal ambition which is of a coarser kind, to be famous, to be well known, to get a lot of money by whatever means, you see, these are things, of course you should have money, of course you may have fame, you want to be well known, no problem. But if that is done in a warping, misaligned to your psychic aspiration, or that takes precedence in a way that it overrides the psychic influence and numbs it, that's when you get into trouble. There you are open to these influences, because there the vital being hooks precisely into this vital desire and catches, pulls, pushes, plays with it, or enters through it. Which is the reason why in the spiritual tradition generally, and even in those who enter into occult knowledge practices from a spiritual perspective, The first thing told is let go of your personal ambitions and desires. It doesn't mean you have to be utterly pure. It just means what's your priority? Do not compromise there from the spiritual perspective. Yes, you can have all those ambitions, make a lot of money, become famous, go up the rung of your business, your job. All that is fine. But it's when that becomes an overwhelming drive to which all else is subjugated and for which you're willing to do anything, that's a perversion. And that's when you are open to these kinds of intrusions. So Nina was protected. That was a good example of how the protection works. The second experience, though, is very different. And she finds that as a therapist, she has to deal with a client who's possessed. She knew it was a person who's possessed. Under pressure from her friend, she takes up the job, invokes mother's protection with the mantra, is able to evict the being that has possessed this person. And what is interesting is the entire personality changes, the face changes, the behavior changes. And this is something fascinating. And I've always looked at it from a certain point of view of what is our real potential. So I will drift around a little bit around this idea. When the possession is complete, the vital being takes over. It's as if on all these layers of consciousness, mental, vital, even subtle physical, depending on the grade of the being, his fibers of consciousness, so to say, plug into your fibers and take over. To the extent that those fibers enter the body itself is reshaped to match the fibrous influence of the subtle being. Okay? If it goes all the way, then even the physical shape can change. There are movies, they're not so nice. I don't recommend for you to watch them. It's not at all nice because it opens to you those things. And that's why I don't want to go too much into this description, but the face changes, the form changes. In cases where, even under hypnosis, where personalities are brought forward, you can see sometimes the color of the eyes, the iris itself can change. Someone who has brown eyes can become blue, green, or gray, or someone who's blue-eyed can become brown or black, just like that in a second. It's amazing. The face changes to an extent that you cannot recognize that person, the way of walking and so on. What is fascinating, and this is why I'm interested in this from a medical point of view and point of view of human potential, in cases where a person has, let's say, multiple personalities, that means multiple beings who are inhabiting, and sometimes they take turns on who comes forward. There can be a personality which is diabetic, another personality which has some other medical problem of indigestion, let's say, and someone who's completely healthy. So there are a few rare cases where there are many personalities. When the healthy personality comes possessing, the person can eat all the sugar they want. They have no problem, no symptoms of diabetes. They digest everything. When the person with diabetes flips in, when the personality with diabetes flips in, then all the symptoms of diabetes kick in instantly. You cannot eat enough sugar. You have all the side effects and so on. You flip the personality and all the symptoms are gone. Now, I'm explaining this because it shows you the potential of your physical body. You may be diabetic, but understand that the diabetes is primarily an energy imprint in your subtle body as it meets the physical body. If that imprint was changed with no change in the physical body, instantly your diabetes symptoms can be erased. Think about what that means. If you could make this change by direct action in your energy body, subtle physical substance, wherever the knot is, if you're able to make that correction within you, your physical symptoms change immediately. The reason why these phenomena are so dramatic is because the surface influence of the surface mind is knocked out and the inner can assert freely without the resistance of the surface, as under hypnosis. But what it means is you can, by a direct process of conscious intervention, change all these patterns. And we know of many cases, including in the ashram and in other places, people who are in the spiritual line who have been able to intervene in this way and have miraculous results, sometimes overnight, sometimes in a gradual process over weeks, months, or even years. This is within your capacity. So, but coming back to this example, well, the face changed. Once the being was evicted, the face changed. And what would be interesting to see is that the new face or the normal face of the person would be much softer, and you would be able to feel the influence of the true personality and even an influence of the psychic. When that possession takes place, those finer things would be gone and you would have this very different personality. What happened though to Nina is that she got hit. She was, as she says, terribly sick with high fever, nose swollen like a blow, she says, and there was an infection and sign of injury on the nose. She had to have surgery. And yet, physically, there was no injury. That's because the being that was evicted was angry. Nina did not have the means to defend herself against the being's attack. The angry being gave her a blow on the nose in the subtle body. Now, whether that took place immediately or at night, I don't know. That's not clear in Nina's description. But whenever it was, that being took its revenge by giving her a blow on the nose. The blow was such that it damaged on the subtle body, the substance, subtle physical, which naturally reflects in the gross physical. In the same way, as I said earlier, the disease, also the diabetes could reflect. Well, an injury can reflect, and especially if it's very close to the physical domain of substance. On the mental plane, perhaps not. Vital plane, higher ranges, perhaps not. Obviously, this being was of the lower vital, close to the physical. These are the ones who normally do such mischief, and therefore a physical result. And she had to have surgery. Her question though, why was I not protected by the mother? What was wrong with me? My response would be, actually, you were in fact protected. As you have seen in the first case, you were protected. In the second case too, you were protected. As a result, the damage was less. But also that you were consciously invoking protection during the process. After it was over, did you complete the disengagement with that, or did you leave gates open? So often this is an error made by therapists. You do your work. During that time, you have your protection because you're conscious. You finished your work, you say, okay, done, go home. You have not made the clear transition to disconnect from the energies of the therapy space or the patients or even the memory of the patients or the energy which is still clinging. And that's why many psychiatrists end up having psychiatric problems themselves, not realizing that the constant interaction with these cases, often involving disturbed energies or beings, something sticks. It hangs around. And to the extent that you're not conscious in those parts, it can leak in, it can create disturbances, eventually even come under some kind of an intrusive influence. I won't use the word possession, but intrusive influence that creates instabilities of some kind. And you may not be conscious because it's happening on those levels. And that's the reason why it's extremely important to disconnect completely after the work is done. Very likely in the high of the achievement, the therapist says, oh, I've done such a great job. Wow, nothing happened. It was to me and I was able to cure the patient. You continue in the exaltation of your achievement, not realizing that on that level, there's still gateways open and you need to close those. The way the stickiness stays can be also in the memory of it. Oh, I did such a great job. And thinking about it leaves you open. And so it's a kind of a skill of the subtle awareness that you must be able to separate. I did it, it's no more mine. And you push out whatever remnant of the influence is there as completely as possible. The mother recommended a particular practice to my teacher, MP Pandit. She said that when there is some such influence, or when you come away from a disturbing interaction. One of the ways to get rid of this influence, she said, you wash your hands and then make this gesture of throwing. As you throw the water, you make this gesture 3 times, 3 representing mental, vital, physical, the 3 grades of your bodies, to clear it out on all 3 levels. Depending on how much the influence hangs around, I would even suggest wash your hands, wash your feet, even if you like, take a full shower, or just wipe off with wet hands the surface of your aura and wash it off with this gesture. These are methods which could be helpful generally to get free of it. But on that level, mental, vital, awareness, emotions, you should also disconnect from that influence. In this case, it could also be that the being, since I don't know the details, it could also be the being caught hold at a time when you are unconscious. So you were in a protective state invoking, afterwards you go home, you are now open. You go to sleep, you went to sleep open. You did not put the protection. So it could have been done in 2 ways. One is that for a few days at least you maintain the awareness of protection because you dealt with something like this. Or you put a general sense of protection against that whole event. And so that being, including everything, is what pushed off from your consciousness, no access given. And all of this actually goes to show that these kinds of interventions should normally be done only under a skilled capacity or a strong vitality. And that's why I think I mentioned a few sessions ago that those who get into that kind of formal occultism generally need to have a strong physical vital, that grade, because they're dealing with things on those levels often. For those of us who are not engaging on those levels so much, but more in the emotional and mental and so on, it may not be such a big deal. There you are open, of course, to influences of those grades, which can also distort you, but rarely of this kind of an injury on the physical level. So yes, mother's protection did act on you throughout. Later, so even if you got this injury, it was a relatively minor injury. It could have been far worse if the being had full access, could have done far more. Or it could be that at that point you weakened in your awareness of the invocation and protection, so still the protection acted. That's the point. The girl herself went back to being sick, went back to being possessed, and mother explains this. In many cases, it happened when people who had been possessed, mother was informed. She intervened immediately. The being was removed without needing to do any procedure. This is the power of the spiritual intervention. Simply bringing the person into her awareness, expelling the being. That's it. And she said afterwards, the person would call back the being. So you get a hint here again, where Nina describes how this patient said she used to go to these nightclubs and felt powerful. She felt powerful when the being possessed her. It was the power of the being that gave her the high. And suddenly the thing is expelled. Now she feels not powerful. She calls back the field of powerful. She calls back the being and again gets seized. And so this is the case, the mother said. In most such examples, the being is called back and again they go back into their usual loop. And so the first thing in such cases is to recognize whether the person wants to let go. And sometimes the price of letting go is letting go of the sense of that fake high and this fake sense of importance that the being brought into that personality through possession or influence even. And that's why going back to your central aspiration, your integrity, sincerity around that center, your priority of your aspiration is so important. Otherwise, one can easily get into these kinds of difficulties. So this is regarding Nina's question. I think that we've covered broadly whatever is required. We can go to the next.
I will proceed with another 2 questions received from Vaibhav. Actually, we have 4 in totals, but we will take the first 2.
Yes.
How can 2 personalities, I'm not sure if I can say individuality in parentheses, stay in the same body in conjoined twins? Is there a single mind, I mean individual, working through both brains? Because how can both of them harmonize things? This gives me a very uneasy feeling. Is there a single psychic being in conjoined twins? And the second question, this reminds me of the dissociative identity disorder, where multiple personalities stay in a single individual. How can the same individual mind take so many personalities which do not know about each other, even have effect on the body very differently?
Yes, I think these are, in a sense, a continuation from Nina's questions, and they deal with cases of such possession. I will take each of these questions one after the other, but you can see there's a continuity of the issue itself. 2 personalities in the same body of conjoined twins. Is it a single mind working through both brains? And how can they harmonize? And one feels uneasy thinking about it. Is it even a single psychic being or 2 psychic beings? The answer simply is it depends. Both cases are possible. In fact, innumerable more complex cases are also possible. So I'll just deal with each of these. Conjoined twins are twins who share a part of the body. So sometimes they're joined at the shoulder or at the level of the hips. And so it's like one person, or rather one body, but with 2 different individualities, so it seems. They are physically bound together, they don't have much choice. Sometimes a surgery is made to separate them and one of them dies. That's generally the case when it was one soul inhabiting this, well, double body. Although it's single body, but it's a double shaped body. It need not be always the case. It can be 2 different souls who are in the connected bodies and having very different personalities also. Though that's not always comfortable for the 2 souls unless they've agreed to this kind of an arrangement, or they have come to an understanding that they're going to take this as far as it goes. Something even more complex is possible. They are not conjoined twins, but they are, I don't know the exact word, they are as if born of the same womb, same time, genetically identical, but separated after birth. So it happens in cases where the mother gave them up for adoption and the adoption agencies separated them. Now, there are examples of this well documented in the medical history. So I just pick a few at random. In many of these cases, both persons ended up with the same name. Both married women of the same names. Both had exactly the same preferences for dresses, colors, and so on. And later in life, when they met, they found all these similarities. In this case, very likely it was a single soul sharing 2 bodies, although the bodies were separated. It's a very interesting idea. In other cases, where you see the personalities being very different and the line of development being very different, then it could be 2 different souls that just happen to have genetically shared material. Or in some rare cases, we may find 2 allied souls working together with some kind of similarities, and so being together. And so certain similarities, but certain differences. In cases where it is actually the same soul sharing 2 bodies, when they come together, they actually feel as if a part of them was missing, which has now come and rejoined. And even if they separate physically, on some level, as if their thought patterns are matching all the time, because it's actually one mind shared into 2 brains or 2 bodies. To the extent that even sometimes they will speak simultaneously, or they will look at each other and they know exactly what they're thinking, because it's actually one mind in 2 bodies. This just shows you that the link from the soul to the physical And even because they would have subtle bodies, which are quite distinct on some level, and then deeper on would be one consciousness. That the soul could be one, and the more surface formed parts could actually be distinct, and still one soul sharing it. And this shows you how much plasticity exists in this phenomenon. It also would make you understand more deeply Mother's comment after meeting Sri Aurobindo in 1914, when she had to leave and then she went to Japan. She says for those years that she was in Japan, her psychic being was with Sri Aurobindo. And she laughs. She says that most people would not be able to understand what that means. But it was as if her soul was there and the body and personality were here at a distance of so many thousand kilometers in Japan. Yes, it's possible. But of course, it needs a very unusual circumstance. For most of us, we might feel emotionally entangled. That's not the same thing. The soul being in a different space or aligned in a different way is a very different experience. So it shows you that a single soul can actually inhabit two bodies which are separated far apart. It's very rare, though. It's very rare, and even rarer where two souls can actually choose to have this kind of a shared relationship and so on, which is again very, very rare. So this is as regards the conjoined twins is involved. It means also that your consciousness, the deeper layers, could be as if located physically elsewhere and still be present in your personality, because the psychic being is not bound to physical location. Yes, of course, it can move in physical location, but in consciousness terms, it can be wide or even infused in a non-physical space. Something of this experience you can have either in certain states of meditation, where you may experience your consciousness enormously wide, or which you will find certain people describing in near-death experiences. When separated from their physical body, they felt themselves as if everywhere, and yet with a special focus in the region of this body. If such a person at the level of the soul was in those two bodies, then it would be, I have two focal points. That's about it. And then when it comes back to re-engage with the physical body, it will feel as if the two experiences blur one over the other, which is the reason why they would end up dressing sometimes the same dress colors on the same day at the same time, and ended up marrying also women of the same names and so on. It's a fascinating exploration, but very rare, as you can see. There could be entire civilizations or planets where the individualization of the psychic being did not take place, as on our Earth, where a psychic being could thus inhabit a group of forms. Think about what that would mean. Let's say there's now a family, and the psychic being inhabits all these, but chooses to be more centered in one of them. Automatically, the others would turn to this one as their leader, would joyously obey that one, because it's myself that I'm obeying, but that's my superior self, this is my lesser self. Interesting idea. And in fact, this does happen. We see this also in certain animal groups, in the relationship of the queen bee to the rest of the hive, or similarly with the ant in the anthill. The ants feel themselves as if a projection or a part of the group consciousness, which is much stronger. And so they would willingly, when they have to cross a water stream, they would willingly die to build a bridge for the rest of the ants to follow. Interesting. But they don't feel they have committed any harm to themselves. It's just the larger group consciousness which has let go of certain bodies, withdrawn from it in order to be able to cross over. And this could be done at a pretty sophisticated level of thinking minds, of evolved human-like beings. And we do know for a fact that there are certain civilizations on other planets where this is the nature of the consciousness. A further complexity is possible. If you can have one inhabiting many, what if you had two inhabiting many and sharing a few? Why not? Yes, it's possible. In which case, when they share a body, let's say, in that body, there'll be both of these psychic beings sharing, allowing one facet to come forward or the other facet to come forward, or simply equally sharing, having their own full satisfaction of individuality in one other body, but sharing these others. And that also is possible. In fact, we are told this by people who have that sensitivity and the occult perception, that in many of the dolphin families, this is what takes place on Earth. That the dolphins are one of the very rare species on Earth where multiple souls would share multiple dolphin bodies. And so among themselves, they can be extremely close as if they are meeting themselves. But they have a level of intelligence which is approaching the human almost. And sometimes even more skilled in capacity to master emotions. And the same principle could actually take place on other planets with entire civilizations of fully developed mental beings. This is where you will appreciate what Mother commented about our physical Earth as a planet Earth. She said it is a focal point for the individualized psychic being. And in the whole universe, this is a focal point for this particular experiment. Think about what that means. Very interesting implications. Many of those beings from other planets would then come to Earth. What is this experience like to be fully individualized in a single body as an individualized psychic being? None of this collective sharing consciousness. What is it like? For some of them, it will be a strange feeling. Oh, it feels weird. You feel cut off. You feel separated. Too narrow, too limited. Whereas for human beings, when you meet those beings, you feel weird. I don't feel like I'm meeting one person. I'm meeting like this huge being spreading over several forms. Maybe a whole group of them comes, let's say a family of 20, and you feel only one person as if meeting you. And it feels so strange. You don't know what to make of it. You don't know how to articulate it, and you shrink. They feel you, this highly individualized consciousness, and they shrink. Oh, what kind of a thing is it? It's overwhelming to them as it is overwhelming to you. Interesting. This is in fact the case for in many kinds of ET encounters on Earth. But for them, it's fascinating to observe us, just as for us, it would be fascinating to observe or even participate in their kind of evolutionary experience. So this is to tell you that our Earth is special in that sense. Doesn't mean they don't have individualized beings. They do also. They do have individualized beings, but they are more an exception than the general rule. As on Earth also, we have group shared beings in human form also, which are more an exception than the rule. And so this is just to answer the first question about two personalities sharing bodies or one psychic being sharing two bodies and so on. So it's a very interesting question from Vaibhav. The second question, though, takes it in a slightly different direction. The question is about dissociative identity disorder, where multiple personalities stay in a single individual. And how can same individual mind take so many personalities who do not know about each other, even have effects on the body very differently? So it's not actually the same mind. They swap the whole mental consciousness into the physical body, in and out, as they flip turns. So in most cases, this is an aberration. It happens, and you will see in those cases, physically, the person is very weak or the nervous system is very weak and vulnerable. And so these beings have popped in or pop in and out as required, and it enormously disrupts the individual life and the psychic evolution of this person. The damage once done, it is very difficult to close those gates and free the person, because as we saw, the person himself feels empty and calls back that kind of experience. Unfortunately also, once that kind of an experience has been had and the hook has gotten, as in the case that Nina mentioned, uh, it can also go into the next life. It's not a very happy thing to say this, but when that link happens, it is always linking also in the subtle layers of the bodies. And there's as if an opening or a hook. And because you think of somebody, you make a contact. You feel somebody, you make a contact. That's the nature of the vital and mental worlds. So when such a person leaves the body, the link formed does not necessarily go away entirely. When they incarnate into the next, the tendency or the vulnerability or the affinity of that link may still remain. And unless there's a conscious effort to disconnect, break, or even a help of intervention from the higher spiritual intervention to cut it off, there may be a tendency for the person to call back or to remain vulnerable to those intrusions. And it may take a couple of lifetimes to get free from that entirely. And that's the reason why it's so important never to open yourself to any intermediate powers. For whatever reason, even those who claim they want to have certain powers, fame, money, or wealth, whatever form it takes, which some of these lower beings may promise you and may or may not actually give. Never play around with these things. We know of a case in the ashram. There was actually a student in the ashram school. He chose to enter into a pact with one of these vital beings, which would give him fame and so on. And mother saw it immediately. She didn't say anything because it was his choice. I think she asked him, how long has it been? And he said something. He knew that mother could see. Then she said, all right, you can go if you want, but you will never speak about your connection here. That is of the mother and Sri Aurobindo. The point was, he could have gone out there and spoken of as if representing mother and Sri Aurobindo when it was a very different influence. He understood that, he agreed, he left, became very famous. And only in the very later part of his life, he would refer to his childhood in the ashram, but that was about it. So a choice made. It made him famous, it gave him wealth, but at the end of the day, it made him a puppet to that being. What he does not or did not recognize is coming back into the next incarnation, there'll be a tendency for that hook to remain. And getting free from some of these beings can be, well, they're sticky. They don't let go easily. So in these cases where multiple personalities inhabit an individual, sometimes they share, sometimes they scramble to push each other out and have their turn for the human experience. They're always low beings, whatever they may claim to be. It's only the low beings who want that kind of access. Higher beings do not, for various reasons I've already explained. First of all, they don't like to sully themselves within the human experience. If they want to, then they will take a pure birth and not, or put an incarnation or an emanation to take birth, or align with somebody, but not in the form of a possession, but in the form of shared, inspired energy, which will often happen in cases of great poets or many of great leaders, that certain higher divine aspects or powers, deities, you may say, align to them. And I think this is also a question somebody has asked just now. I think from Bharat Kumar, he says the possibility of individuals being connected to energy forms or goddesses as a spiritual work in the world. Yes, this is also possible, but they never possess you. They never interfere with your freedom. What they do is they may grant you a kind of a shared, emanative, inspired energy, which is theirs, to help lift you in the work that you do. And to that extent, they participate in you and grow with you. And of course, they may choose to withdraw if you do not comply with their standards or their values. It's only the lower ones who will get in anyway and then warp you into their agenda, because for them, human freedom is not important. So there's a question from Buddha Nursery, how to get rid of these vital beings? Well, mostly you don't have a problem. If you are asking the question, that means you don't have a problem. If you had a problem, you would likely not ask the question. But let's assume that you have a problem of some kind of which you feel intrusive. Simply refusal to engage with that quality of energy and filling yourself with the higher positive gradations, aspiration, consciousness, invoking the presence, to fill your entire aura, your entire circumconscient is the term Sri Aurobindo uses. All your awareness, including the extension as it meets the world, should be aligned to your deepest psychic aspiration or your highest loyalty to the divine will, the divine presence, the divine mother, or your idea of the divine consciousness, whatever it is. That one-pointedness is your natural protection, and in that, nothing can get in. But if a part of you says, but, of course I want the spiritual, but I want this also. I want this power. I want this. It opens like a gate through which these influences come. They can't possess you because we are naturally well protected. That's the way we have grown in evolution. But what they can do is they can nudge you, provoke you, and then begin the process of exchange. The more you open, the more they get an entry. And eventually, over a long process, they get a hook into you. After that, it's very difficult to let go. What you will need at that point is a pure sincerity that says, this I choose to refuse and remove once and for all. And even if later influences are felt, you cut off and refuse and focus on what you want, cut off the rest. That's the way. It's really a psychological excision which requires a certain sincerity and a choice that you make. So there's nothing else that's required. How do you do that? How do you do that to someone else? To help someone else? That's much more difficult. And you can see from Nina's experience, it's not easy. It needs somebody with a certain skill, knowledge, capacity generally. But if the person is willing, then they can begin to make an effort, and then you can help by invoking the protection and presence for them. But without their participation, it's very difficult to do this. I know of, I can name him. He is well known in our circle, psychiatrist, Dr. Soumitra Basu, who shared in one of the meetings here. He shared how for some of these very sticky patients, he worked with certain tantrics in Bengal and who were skilled in this kind of thing. And he was able to see how they worked and how successful they were. Sometimes when he would call them for a particular patient, they would come to his place and immediately identify the patient and say, oh, that's the one. And sometimes they would say, you will find on his arm, there's a particular amulet that has been tied. That's the hook. Get rid of that and you'll find the person will be free. Or sometimes they would do other forms of intervention. But it was interesting to see how this more magical, well, tantric we will say here, but magical knowledge can work with psychiatry for these kinds of cases with great effect. But coming to Vaibhav's question, how do they share a single mind? They don't. It's different minds which plug into the same biology. And to that extent, there's a reshaping even on the form and the thoughts and memories. They're completely different beings who enter and take turns. There's one rare case I want to mention here because it's something so interesting, where two beings actually agreed to share as psychic beings, souls, not external beings, and they would take turns, flip between each other. And so they were taken to a hypnotherapist. And there are certain forms of hypnotic interventions in which also an eviction can be made. But again, it's tricky. So the hypnotist began to drive out one of them. It flipped into the other. Then he said, oh, even this should not be here. And he began to intervene. And then a third voice came in and said, I am the soul presiding over this. And there is an agreement between these two to share this body. Please do not interfere. And then it was allowed to continue. But it was, you could find that there was a certain harmony between them. They were not really intruding into each other. But these are also exceptionally rare cases. The point, though, which Mother actually says, there are so many cases, so many variations possible, that even to list all of them would be too much. But I'm sharing some of this just to give you a sense of it. Now, the third question from Vaibhav was about childhood schizophrenia. And schizophrenia generally is a term used to describe seeing or hearing things which are not physical. And childhood schizophrenia, I'm not even sure if it is a correct diagnosis in many cases when someone speaks of imaginary friends, that they speak to someone or someone tells them to say bad things. Um, I would not really put it in the same category as the schizophrenia that is normally used in psychiatry. Many children, especially at a young age, are open to things or perceptions of the subtle. It takes a while for the subtle body to fully identify with the physical. And there's a period sometimes of a few years in which that identification is not yet complete. Generally, in Western psychiatry, they say until the age of 3, there has not been sufficiently the individualization. And it's because that's generally the age when particularly the vital layer fully identifies with the physical. And that's when you can say, now we have the full personality. Even in the Buddhist tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, where they take great pains to try to trace out some of their senior lamas. As for example, the Dalai Lama, when he leaves his body, he gives some hints sometimes of where he will reincarnate, or subsequently those around him, senior lamas, receive those hints in dream or omens, at which point they go out looking for him. But this is not done until at least 2 years have passed. So the idea is until 2 years are over, there has not been sufficient integration of the personality that the personality is fully plugged into the physical body. And if this is, just sufficient, there are still layers which may be open, so to say. And so at a young age, one often has perceptions which may be half of things beyond. And sometimes it can appear to be, or the mind can interpret it as something telling you or suggesting, when it could be that, or it could be just your own subconscious ideas. And so it's difficult to say which is the case. They may not always be external vital beings. They may also be suggestions from the environment, not as beings, but simply thought patterns or emotion bundles passing through. Or it could be their own deeper layers or subliminal ranges where we are open to many things, popping up certain suggestions which are objectivized. So I think that's as regards the third question. Fourth question from Vaibhav is in the same line of discussion. Tourette syndrome, where one of the forms is of compulsive behavior of some kind, or epileptic jerking of the body, words being thrown out suddenly. And often you will find they are swear words. That itself gives you a hint. That's not what the person wants. He doesn't want to say those swear words, but suddenly he finds himself blurting out certain words or moving in odd forms. They are a form of a partial possession, or at least an influence. You see, the possession itself can be through various degrees. When there is a full possession, it's very difficult to get free. Then the personality changes. But when there's a partial thing, there are influences, nudging, pushing, pulling, intruding in a way. And he asks, deep brain stimulation surgery tends to work. Why? Because it simply numbs those centers where the vulnerability exists. So in many forms of such psychiatric disorders, in the old days, they would give them electric shocks, very painful. But the being which is possessing would say, this is too painful, it would leave. So it, of course, damaged the person also. More sophisticated methods with psychiatric drugs tend to dull certain centers in the nervous system, which prevent that access. But then they dull the personality because your own deeper, subliminal or vital bodies cannot influence enough the physical body. But the dulling is a gate that blocks everything. Or the deep brain stimulation using ultrasonic or heat or magnetic fields, they dull certain parts of the brain and numb them in a way that again weakens those links, giving this individual a chance to come forward and push back. So the methods are still very crude. There are more direct means if you had occult knowledge. I'm looking at the questions. Avishkara, higher beings, gods, embodying the individual. I don't recommend giving too much importance to these things. You see, we have traditions in many temples all over the world where priests would claim that the deity now possesses them, and they will speak and do things, demonstrate unusual powers. They will put their hand in molten lead and apparently being immune, which is supposed to be proof that a higher spiritual entity has taken charge. They, of course, read your mind, tell you your future, and so on. They are in India at least a dime a dozen, even in very small, low-grade temples where the beings are not even spiritual, they are vital beings. And they will often claim certain things or demand certain things, sometimes demand sacrifice. In return, they will give back your little desires. So often we have this term called village deities. So there's a temple associated with a village. They need not be very high. They represent vital beings, low or higher, but still vital beings. They will promise you good rain, good crops in return for certain things in exchange. These things were relevant at a certain part of human evolution where human consciousness itself was of a low grade. Once you have crossed those grades in your evolution, to have interchange with beings of that grade lower than yours in consciousness is naturally pulling you down. And so, as a general statement, I will say for all of us who seek a spiritual life, all such forms are to be avoided. At best, you may choose to, out of curiosity, watch something, but do not give any importance to it from a spiritual point of view. They may be useful for that, let's say, deity or that temple or that following, not for you, because they always represent something of an inferior level. Even the knowledge, guidance they give will belong to that grade. May have some very practical benefits. They may tell you, "Hoy, you have lost your goat, you will find it in such and such a place." Well, practical value, but spiritually not helpful. And if you think you got guidance for problems of your life, be sure that with that guidance will come a bigger problem. And I've known of too many cases like this where some such supposedly spiritual entity, and I'm using the word entity, not being, because they are entities, gave advice that, oh, you have your best friend or your family member has done black magic against you, and just created splits and divisions in the family harmony. And it was all fake to begin with. All this is just to point out that they may claim to be higher beings. It doesn't have to be so. But the very fact that they need to demonstrate to prove something to you shows you that they belong to a lower grade. Lower grade may be powerful. Power does not need height of consciousness. A low vital being can have tremendous power even to bend metal or to cure or heal physical ailments. Doesn't mean spiritual. So we should be very clear about this. Higher beings do not enter such possessions. At best, they infuse a certain power to lift you to a higher state, as we see in the case of Joan of Arc or other vibhutis in history who were decisive in some action to change human history or to manifest some extraordinary capacity. But they did not claim to be divine beings. You see, this is the difference. The moment you have a claim to be a divine being, you can be sure it is not so. I think that covers the questions we have. We go to the next one. You are silent, I think.
Okay, now you
Yes.
can hear me. So we will go to a question received from Vega Darshi. In one of your talks, you have mentioned about one of your teachers. She was very intelligent. Mother foresaw that she would lose balance, and the mother blessed and put force in the right part of her head. But eventually she had lost her balance. Why did it happen? How not to never lose one's mental balance in one's lifetime?
Yes, this is one of those difficult situations. There was another case, I think it was Bharat Bala, was it? There was some girl, Aravind Bala, sorry. There was one girl who was named Aravind Bala, that is daughter of Sri Aurobindo, literally. It was from a family in Pondicherry, local devotees, and the child would come and play on Sri Aurobindo's lap sometimes. This was before the ashram was formed. And both mother and Sri Aurobindo saw in her the spiritual potential and did everything to help the family and her. At some point, she had some lump or some growth on her head. The parents took her and had that surgically removed without informing Sri Aurobindo and the mother. They came back and mother was so upset. She said, "Why did you do this without asking us first?" And from that point on, the girl began to have epileptic seizures. And it's as if her spiritual potential was damaged. Because what is epilepsy? Epilepsy is an attempted possession, where those beings try to get a hook into the body and the body is violently pushing back, and that creates the epileptic fit. Now, in her case, there was a certain weakness, obviously, in the nervous system, but with a biological basis. The surgery exposed that weakness in a way that now those beings could get in, or at least attempt to get in. The result is your whole spiritual potential is damaged for good, because now you have, as if on a physical level, a gate half open or vulnerable at least. You cannot even build an intensity of consciousness without that gate being destabilized in some form or other. So it's extremely important that we have a strong physical health. Never allow your system to get disbalanced. Common reasons for imbalance, and there were some questions regarding this: lack of food, lack of sleep, and unbalanced ambition, which disbalances your vital nature and creates those openings which I have discussed before. But lack of sleep, lack of food weakens the body and weakens the nervous system, which is linked to the subtle physical vital ranges. And that weakening enough, as if breaks down, creates gaps and allows intrusive influences. Once they get in, they, so to say, cut their way, create grooves that later they can come in more easily. And of course, the personality gets swayed by the high and so on. So be very protective of your good health. Do not push it to the brink where you have not slept for many days or not eaten for many days. It's always harmful. Fortunately, for the bulk of us, this is not an issue. It's only if you find your nervous system is very weak or fragile from the beginning that you should be worried. Now, in the case of the question of this person that I have mentioned, she had obviously some weakness. I do not know if it was hereditary or it was a carryover from a past life imbalance. I mentioned before this, that sometimes when those things are done, once the gateway is opened and an imbalance created, the tendency might carry into the next life. There was one such person who mother kept as a personal attendant. She was named Chinmayi. Very wonderful person when the psychic was in the front. Beautiful paintings that she had done, which are still present upstairs. She would serve Sri Aurobindo and the mother with great love and devotion, except that every once in a while she would come under some influence and behave erratically, abusing even Sri Aurobindo, abusing the mother, abusing people around, and so on, when she was under that influence. And many who were going to the mother said, "But why do you keep her nearby?" And mother said, "Well, if we send her out, the next person who comes will come under the same influence." And for whatever reason, there was a reason they had to keep her and to try to get her free from that. And it was one of those cases where something was carried on from a prior incarnation. And I suppose even in this case of Aravind Bala, it was something like that. And in this person also, the teacher I have spoken of, there could have been some such or partially inherited. And mother saw that, put her hand, I think it was to the woman's left side that mother put her right hand, and put a strong will to dissolve that or block that weakness or heal that. And it was only much later in life, I think when she had crossed beyond 50 or 40, I don't know the age now, that something happened. There were a series of events where it really pushed her personality off track. And one of those had to do with strong emotional desire forms. It tripped, so to say. Still, I believe if at that time we had suitable help, it could have been managed or even helped her to get free of it. But there was nobody then with sufficient skill or knowledge. So really the question is how never to lose one's mental balance in one's lifetime. Assuming you have already a healthy system, take care of your health. Physical health first, emotional health, and then of course, positive thought, positive ideals, aspirations, priorities. Often, just the fact that you dwell on negative thoughts tends to create a darkness in your aura. And a darkness is like it's a magnet, it attracts. See, in the vital world, the law of the vital consciousness is like attracts like. You become pessimistic, you become negative, hateful, spiteful, jealous. Those vibrations fill your aura. They don't harm the other person against whom you have spite. They fill you, and you carry that spite and anger or hatred in your aura. But they become also dark patches or like holes through which similar energies or vital beings of that grade are attracted, and they draw, so to say, feed on your anger, hatred, because they are of that grade. For them, it's nourishment. On the other hand, they then provoke you to feel more anger, hatred, and feed on it. But you created the food that they liked. If now you choose to reverse, think positive, put out positive energies, be optimistic, you as if your aura lights up, brightens, the darkness goes away. These beings find it not interesting. In fact, they're repelled, or even some of them tend to be dissolved by optimism and positive light and energy. So they run away. And this attracts similar vibrations from the environment, similar people, but also similar energies. Oh, here's a positive instrument. Let's give it more possibilities. Let's see what we can do through it. Give it suggestions, give it ideas. Those beings also come. All the time it's happening. We are all the time influenced by all kinds of things in the universe. They don't possess you, but they just throw at you positive suggestions and ideas. Why not? It's a good thing. You can choose to accept what you like or not. So this is assuming you don't already have a defect in your nervous system or your physical body. If you do, then you have to be extremely careful to protect by good sleep, good nourishment, strengthen the body with good exercise, and overcome those limitations and weaknesses. There's a very interesting letter of Sri Aurobindo regarding this, and he deals with this in the context of epilepsy, where he explains that it's an attempted possession because something was open in the nervous system. Then he says, if that is rooted in the biology, then the entire body replaces all its cells over a span of about 7 years. If there is any imprint of that epileptic fit, let's say, intrusion, it will take 7 years for the effect of that to be entirely removed from your body. So if you can prevent those episodes and prevent them for 7 years, then you're free. If it happens in between, then you start counting your 7 years all over again. But during that time, of course, you do what is needed to strengthen your system and evict those influences. But if you can sustain it long enough until that whole influence is completely taken out from your physical consciousness, then you are effectively free of it. And so you must know that even if you have a physical weakness, you can overcome it. It just takes a little longer. And with the help of the spiritual influence and protection, that can be done so much more easily. If it can be done by somebody who has no spiritual opening, well, somebody with a spiritual opening can do it much more easily. I think this is as far as we would go with this question. I want to just, before closing the whole discussion, I want to point out that I've put out on the channel itself, under the community tab, poll with the question regarding the length of these live sessions. My problem here is, if we go in depth, it tends to take longer, about, in this case, as you can see, an hour and a half almost. But if we keep it shorter, we tend to be too shallow. We can't go deep enough into a subject. And longer sessions require more concentration. So what length do you prefer? And I have put 4 options there. Please do look at it. Please give your response, because it will help us to adjust the nature of our content. I also would like to know if it's worth it for us to go in depth, or we could have just taken some of these things and answered them superficially and moved on. But to me, it's not satisfying. I would rather we go down to the basic principles, so that our understanding now is deep and rich enough that all the variations of the phenomena are also understood. But it also requires longer time and sometimes repetition of certain themes or ideas that we have covered through in the past. There's one question which is on the chat box. Some light on a spiritual perspective on attention deficit disorder. And if one has that, how can you follow the spiritual path? Attention deficit disorder is a newfangled term created by modern medicine, psychiatry, in order to sell you more medicines. It is not a sickness. It just means shallow attention span or inability to hold attention for very long, which is nothing but weak power of concentration. That's all. The reasons can be multiple. Very often with children where you have this, you will see them extremely restless. There's an irritation in the nervous system, not realizing that the food additives, especially the colorings, are known to cause irritation of nervous system. And to the children, we give colorful food with a lot of sugar, and it creates this irritation and restlessness and leads emotions, life energies, and thoughts into that kind of restlessness. Second, the entire educational system is designed to make you more and more restless. Come on, one activity to another. Your parents keep telling you, move, keep doing something. Why are you sitting idle and daydreaming? Do something. You were never allowed to sit back, quiet, calm yourself, bring into stillness, and rest in stillness. Well, your education should do that. As an adult, if you think you have this, reverse the process. Start doing asanas, hold the poise of the asana, hold the stretch, bring stillness and calm into your nerves. Change the food you eat, remove the foods which could be processed foods, which might have preservatives and color additives, which create that irritation. Go back to healthy food, fresh foods without additives and colorings and preservatives. And you will find very quickly, within a few days, within a few weeks, much of that restlessness will subside. Then you have to rebuild your concentration power. I've seen people who have built the power of concentration over a few days until they can hold attention without difficulty for hours at a time. Then they neglect it, and in a few weeks, it drops back to something like half an hour. But they know what it's like, so they can regain. But do it. And how do you build your attention span or concentration? Do something you like to do which requires your attention. That's not watching TV. TV is passive, it's not attention. You read a book, analyze, study, do some handwork, needlework, cooking, organizing, arranging, writing, whatever form it is, but which requires your mind's active attention. Hold that, but do something you enjoy. Hold it as long as you can. When you feel tired, you can't do more, push just a little more, and then pause and come to rest in stillness and calm, not restless other activity. Just become calm and relaxed, as if daydreaming, if you like. If you can remain quiet without daydreaming, in a quiet centered aspiration, eyes open, doesn't matter. Once you feel your mind is relaxed sufficiently, you re-engage and continue. By persisting in this way, you will develop your power of concentration very rapidly. You will be surprised. Sometimes within days, you can build up such a tremendous power. But that's how you will overcome your attention deficit disorder. It's a deficit of attention, which is nothing but concentration power. It's not a sickness. It has no essential basis in your personality, except perhaps the restlessness of the biology, which also can be overridden by the mind. But deal with it on all levels, and you'll be free of all these problems. And I think this is all that we should do for today. maybe we could take one last closing question.
Nitin is writing, how to know if an idea comes from the mother or is a delusion created by the ego mind-body complex?
Yes. Having discussed all these things about influences and beings from other worlds, this would be the most important thing for us. You have an idea. How do you know it is coming from the divine or from a deeper range within you or from any one of these intermediate sources, maybe benevolent also or malevolent, meant to distract? How would you know? There are many tests you can apply. First, just rationality. Mostly we don't apply the test of rationality. Most ideas or feelings we accept in the very impulse in which they come. So make it a habit never to accept an impulse. An impulse is never yours. It pops up from somewhere. Just because it pops up from inside you, you may think it's yours, but it's not yours. It enters and then pops up. But entry point may be elsewhere. So pause. Objectify in your mind's reason. Does it make sense? Does it feel right? Rationally. Just that will eliminate a lot of the mixture and confusion. Second, apply the deeper feel. And I will use the word psychic here, but it does not mean you have to have realized your psychic being. Just a kind of a deeper sensitivity. Does it feel right? Sometimes, again, to objectify, you can ask, would the mother approve of it? And that often is a reference. But if you feel directly, you will feel, something is not okay. Sometimes it passes the test of reason, but you feel something is not okay. And then wait. If you're not sure, wait. Don't rush into doing it. If you can afford to wait, wait for the clarity. And only when you have the true clarity that you should act, especially where it matters. Where it doesn't matter too much, it's not a big deal. Third, the quality of consciousness. You will grow familiar more and more as you begin to observe. So if you have done the first two steps, you will learn to distinguish a certain quality of vibe. This comes, it feels coarse, crude, pushy, compelling. I don't like that. I consciously relax and disengage from it. It comes as a pure, refined, even sattvic type of an idea form. Does it have an agenda of its own? Or is it clear, impersonal? It does, but with no particular angle or aspect of or agenda of mission. Feels right because it's equal. It does not have that bias. But when it comes from a higher grade, which is more intuitive, then it has a very different quality, almost like a light that fills. It brings into your awareness as if dawning a greater knowledge. Oh, I didn't realize, as if I understand better, more deeply. It reveals what it is, or also the domain it has to act upon, or the consequences of that action. It reveals itself. Or if it's purely from the psychic intimation, then it will come as a very fine suggestion, very clear, pure, and that quality of purity. And the second quality is stillness. It is utterly still. No compulsion, no pushing, but also utterly pure. And it's as if the two blend into each other in that quality. If you have grown familiar to this feel of the vibe, you catch it. Still, you may want to at first check, because initially there will be tendency of mixtures. And then a simple test is, what if you don't follow it? If I don't follow, I feel a pang, I feel something missing, I feel, I wish I would. Then you know there's a mixture of your desire or emotion, because sometimes your fine desires can masquerade as a deeper, subtler feel. But if on the other hand you say, if I don't do, fine, it doesn't care. It's there, it's true by itself, irrespective of whether you accept or not. Then you say, okay, this is. So in this way, you will feel and learn to distinguish by repeated engagement and refinement of your own experience. until at some point the purification will have happened so clearly, you will know. And you will catch when there's a mixture. I know this is mixed. I wait until I'm able to still the mixture and take only the essential and then act on it. Anything else will always have those gradations of mixture: vital, mental, agenda, influence, bias, etc. The pure psychic or the pure intuitive. And these are the two sources of the divine help, guidance, suggestion, and so on. Sometimes you have to make a choice. Do I do this or that? Should I do this or not? So often we take a position which is, we ask, Mother, should I do this or not? And maybe the answer is, it doesn't matter whether you do. It's the state in which you do which matters. So her answer will not be yes or no. And it will not come from outside. It will not come through symbols. Of course, you may still project as a symbol. The true answer will always be felt within. So rather than asking this yes or no, this or that, the better thing to ask will be, give me clarity of what should be done, or what is the right action from my side. You ask for clarity for that and wait. Removing from you all personal mixture of bias, expectation, desire, and preference. Like or dislike, whatever the outcome, I will accept. Stay very quiet and still, as far as possible, as deeply as possible, as completely as possible, but waiting for the clarity. And it will not come from outside. It's as if within you, the influence, the intuition or the psychic influence will clarify. And suddenly it will be obvious. Yes. And it's obvious. And you follow. So in this way, you will cultivate and purify and make yourself more and more transparent as an instrument for the divine guidance. And if at the same time you've worked on the other parts of you and opening to the inner and higher ranges and allowing the initiation of action more and more through these intuitive or psychic inspirations, then that process will become more and more complete. You can combine this with consecration in the work itself, in the action, knowing that although you know what is right, as you move into action, there might be mixtures. So you go with the idea that whatever I do, I will stay vigilant. And if there's any mixture, I know I will be guided and I will wait to be guided and continue till then. So these are means by which you will be able to separate the true guidance from the delusion created by ego, mind, body complex, as Nitin has put it. And I think this is a good point to pause our session today. For the next 4 weeks, I will be traveling, and I am not sure whether I will always have access at this time. So the days when I don't have access to the internet at this time, we will upload one of the other themes or talks, but at this time, so that those of you who like to join at this time from around the world for the live session, we will still have something that takes place which will be of similar inspiration. And on the days when I can connect, I will of course come online also for the live session. But it's just for the next 4 weeks that there may be some change in the form. The question you sent are still many more. We will continue them whenever we have the next live session. We'll take a moment to concentrate together, in a concentration, in an aspiration, knowing that with the divine protection around us, nothing can fundamentally touch, disturb, or harm. Our inner alignment, sincerity, and one-pointedness of purpose is what we have to grow, intensify. And as that grows, we are naturally immune to harm, and the divine protection naturally becomes that much more effective. And we call for that help, for that guidance altogether in aspiration.